What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another hunting boot camp today, talking about morel mushroom hunting tips for beginners. But before we get into that, real quick, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss out on all kinds of hunting videos, fishing videos, tips and tricks, gear reviews, unboxings. I do all that kind of stuff and more, so be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. So hickory chickens, morels, whatever you want to call them, they are a highly coveted mushroom because they are very tasty, and it's also just a really fun time, something fun to do in the spring when you find them. Kind of like shed hunting. So in this video I'm going to show you how to identify them, how to find them, where to look, when to look, and then how to even harvest them. So let's just get right to it, the morels themselves. What to look for and how to do it. So let's start with what a morel is. First off, it's a mushroom, just a type of fungus. This is what they look like. The top part is called the cap, the bottom part is called the stem. Underneath the ground is the fungus equivalent of roots called mycelium. They're really small little fibers, and that's how the mushroom gets nutrients and whatnot. And we'll talk about all that in a little bit, but that's the basic stuff. They can vary in size, shape, and color. The shape not as much, mainly just kind of what the cap looks like. I have experience hunting mushrooms in both Nebraska and Kansas, and we really only have two types of morels, starting off with the grays. Now these are the ones that are going to show up earliest in the season, and they're not going to get very big. They're going to be really tiny, so you've got to keep your eyes peeled, especially, because you haven't been morel hunting for a while. So you kind of got to break your eyes back in, find those little grays, and they'll only get about 1 inch to 4 inches at most. And then as the season progresses and it starts getting warmer soil temps, warmer air temps, you're going to find the yellows. And if you've seen pictures on Facebook of people holding, mushrooms in a hand and it goes all the way to their elbow, or another common one they like to do is lay it down out in some grass somewhere, and then they'll put beer cans or pop cans along it. Those are going to be your yellows. Obviously the cap is going to be yellow colored, and they can get huge. And that's the two main ones here in Nebraska and Kansas. There's other ones, there's like black morels and stuff. I have no experience with those, so I can't really tell you. But they don't really change too much. It's just kind of the color and the shape of the cap that really looks different. The only thing you really need to know about these morels is every morel is going to be hollow on the inside, and that is important so you can distinguish them from these, which are false morels. They're going to be kind of a reddish color, and they're going to be solid on the inside. If you find those, you don't want them. They're no good to eat. So, I mean, they don't look exactly like morels, but to a beginner, they can be mistaken, so just keep that in mind. But if it's hollow, you're good. If it's not, throw it out. So now you know what a morel is and kind of some of the types to look for. How do you go about finding them? And the first step is going to be really simple. Just walk slow. You're going to want to walk super slow. Once you find your areas that you think there's morels in, just go walk slow, keep your eyes peeled, and eventually, if you're lucky, you will find some. They can be super easy to miss, especially those grays early in the season, because they can pop up under leaf matters, under bark, and thick brush. So you basically leave no stone unturned, for lack of better words. But they can be super easy to miss, especially early on. The big yellows, they're a little easier to find for obvious reasons. But those early morels and even the smaller yellows, they can be kind of tough, and finding those morel spots can be really tough as well. When you do find them, however, kind of take a second and look it over. Look over the area that you're hunting. Kind of see what the terrain is, why this morel is here, and kind of also focus on the morel. You want to train your eyes to look for areas that are similar to where you're finding these morels. And also, when you do find that first morel, stop and scour the area around it. More often than not, morels will grow in little groups. There might be clusters of them. You might find 4 morels coming out of the same spot. You might find, just littered with them, or you might find one off on one side, and then you just walk a little bit, and then there's a whole colony of them. So you want to really stop and scour the area, because more often than not, there'll be a whole group of morels, or at least a couple other ones in the same area. And then, keep that in the back of your mind. What's similar in that area? Are you in a lowland? Are you on this side of a hill or that side of a hill? A lot of things can determine what is good morel habitat, and it varies from year to year, and we'll get into all that in just a second. So the last two tips here aren't really morel specific, but they're good tips nonetheless. The first one is on heavily pressured land, so like private land that you and other people have permission on, or especially public land. Don't be afraid to go off the beaten path. Kind of think outside of the box. Put the extra effort in. You know, on public land, people stop at the parking lots, they'll pull alongside the roads, and they're gonna hunt wherever is closest next to the roads, next to parking lots, wherever they stop. You know, they're not gonna, a lot of people aren't gonna go and put that extra effort in. They're not gonna walk miles in, or they're not gonna walk through thickets and get all torn up and stuff. If you do that, you might be able to stumble onto a little honey hole that other people haven't, just because of lack of effort. So put in that little extra effort, and sometimes you'll be rewarded. And the final thing is more kind of gear you'll need. Muck boots are really nice, especially because there can be dew. So if you're going out in the morning, or if you're going out after a rain, morels love rain, that's nice to have those muck boots on. And also jeans are a must too, because you might be going through stickers, you might be going through nettles, poison ivy, who knows. Those are two things you really want. Another one is permethrin. You want to treat your clothes with permethrin or some other kind of tick repellent, because ticks will be out in full force. And also make sure to keep an eye out for snakes as well. You know, mushrooms are growing on the ground, and they kind of grow in a lot of similar places that snakes such as cottonmouths and copperheads happen to like. So just keep an eye out for all that, kind of keep that in the back of your mind, and you'll have a lot better trip when you're out there morel hunting than if you're out there in shorts and sandals. That about covers what and how to look for morels. Now we're going to get to timing, when to look. So morels start popping up when the ground temp is anywhere from 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is about 4 inches down. If you need to know, you can get a soil thermometer, even a basic kitchen thermometer, and just stick it down in the soil, and that should tell you your soil temp. There's also websites that'll tell you that information as well. As a rule of thumb, this is about March to mid-May. It really is location dependent, and even little areas inside of a general region will heat up quicker than other areas. These are called microclimates. As far as air temperatures, you're looking for about a daily high of in the 60s to higher, and lows in about the 40s. You don't want it to go below freezing. It might not hurt, but if it's in that 40s range to even warmer, you're gonna have better luck. Another thing you need for morel growth is adequate moisture. Morels, fungus, they need moisture to grow, they need moisture to thrive. So if it's a dry year, it's gonna be tougher to find them. And if it is a dry year, focus on areas that are gonna remain wetter longer, so low areas, or areas that might have more shade or are facing a certain direction versus another. So for the morel hunting season, will run till about the end of May here. I found them in June one year, and that's on a cooler than average spring. But once soil temps warm up too much, the morels also will just stop growing. They won't pop anymore. So once the morel pops up, it'll last only about 14 days, and that's your time frame to go out there and pick it, to go out there and find it. And you're not just in a race against the clock at this point, you're also in a race against frost. If it frosts on morels, they can burn them, and it might not make parts of them as appetizing. Animals, turkeys and deer also love morels. I found lots of them have eaten before. And even dry weather. Dry weather can dry them out, and they won't be as edible or as appealing as when they first popped up. So you're kind of in a race of the clock. You got about 2 weeks, and if you're on public land, you've got a lot less time, because other people get that itch and they're going to be out there hitting it hard just as you are. And going off of that, morels don't just all pop up at once. There'll be some that'll pop up earlier than others, and then there'll be some more that come up later. So go back and check those areas you've previously checked. Even if you found morels there might be ones that are under some leaves and they're only that big when you were there and you didn't see them, and now they're that big. They can pop up and they can grow fairly fast. So go back, check every couple days, once it's the season, once it's time, and you might find even more, and you might find bigger ones. You might find those yellows where the grays once were, just a few weeks prior. Another good time to look for morels is right after a good spring rain. So if you've got those highs in the 60s to 70s, and then you get a nice rain, be prepared to go look for morels either the day after or several days after. So April showers, bring morels. Doesn't rhyme, but it's true. Final thing about timing, these are kind of old wives' tales, but they do hold true, at least in the areas where I've hunted in Nebraska and Kansas. They're pretty simple. One, if the wood violets are blooming, the morels are out. And two, if the lilacs are blooming, the morels are out. So if you see lilacs, if you see woods violets, and they're blooming, go morel hunting. Now we've talked about what morels are and when to find them. Now let's talk about where to find them. So starting off, look around trees. Look in timbers, forests, woods, whatever you call it. Morels like growing in trees. Now you can find them in other places. I found them in pastures, I found them out in sand. You can find them a lot of places. But start in areas with trees, and there's going to be specific trees that for one reason or another mushrooms tend to prefer. And it's going to vary once again on what area of the country you're hunting in. So like Nebraska, we don't have poplar trees. But other areas, they say they find a lot of morels around poplar trees. So that's just one example. Now in Nebraska, we find them around elm trees, ash trees, cottonwood trees. Those are about the main 3 tree species I found them around. You can also find them if you know where an old apple orchard is. They are said to like those areas as well. And then there's other local tree species in your immediate region that they might prefer if you don't have those other tree species like I just mentioned. Look for those, and then you'll have a better chance of finding morels. And we can talk about this right now. We'll just go into it here. So I mentioned that parts of a morel, and they have those little, what is essentially the roots of the morels. Now they're not true roots because they're not a plant, but for all intents and purposes, they're roots. Now those mycelium, aka the roots, form these things called mycelium mats. Just a whole network of mycelium, and these mycelium mats tap into the trees. They tap into the trees for nutrients, sugars, and whatnot, moisture exchanges. It's a symbiotic relationship with the trees. So when that gets disturbed, when that gets disrupted, it forces those mycelium mats to be like, oh hey, we need to do something. You know, we might not be around if these trees die, so we need to do something. We need to produce some spores to get carried out by the wind, and hopefully we can go repopulate an area with more trees that aren't dying. So that leads me to my next tip. Look for areas where there's dead trees or disturbed areas. So places like logged areas, if you're in a place where they do logging a lot. If you're in a place where there was a forest fire, look there a year or two later. And there's kind of a little bit of, depending on the disruption. So like if there's a dead tree and it just died that year, you might find a few. The next year, once the bark is starting to fall off, and you might see even mushrooms growing up on the tree, those are the ones I really focus on. When I'm just walking through looking at a new area to mushroom hunt, I'm looking for those dead trees that still have bark, but it's just barely hanging on. There might be some other mushrooms up in the way top of it, and you might find other mushrooms around the bottom too. But I'm going to focus on those areas for morel hunting. And more often than not, I find them because, you know, that, for lack of a better term, that life force from the tree just kind of going back down in the soil, and it's kind of scaring those mycelium mats, so they're shooting up morels that are gonna shoot out spores so they can continue propagating somewhere else in case, you know, there's not any other trees they can tap into in the area. So a good example of this, and if you're watching this and if you're in this area, I would be hitting these areas hard. So Iowa, they just got a derecho last year. Big windstorm came through, knocked down a bunch of crops. If there was any areas of timber somewhere where it was fairly thick timber and a lot of trees got knocked over, I'm talking cottonwood, ash, elm, any of those, I would be hitting those areas hard for morel hunting this year, because those trees are more likely dead, they're uprooted. Some of them might still be alive, but more likely than not, you know, they're uprooted. There's a lot of disruption in that soil, so if there were mycelium mats from the morels, they're going to be like, oh hey, we need to put spores out, we need to repopulate somewhere else because this forest is kind of, you know, not in the best shape. So I would be hitting those areas hard if I was in that area in Iowa where that derecho came through. But, you know, look for those disturbed areas, look for, and even if you're in an area where there's just one high wind and a tree got knocked over, I found them multiple times where there was just one big old ash tree or big old elm tree and they got knocked over. There's root ball, you know, you can see the root ball, and they're growing up in the root balls, they're growing up all the way around it, because they were tapped into that tree, and now that tree's dead, so they're trying to move on. So look for disrupted areas or dead trees. Those are going to be really good places to focus on to find morels. As I previously mentioned, on a dry year, you're going to want to look for areas that are well shaded, that are going to retain moisture better, and also just low areas where they capture water and it's going to hold water a little better, rather than somewhere, you know, maybe higher elevation and it's kind of more sandy or something. You're going to want to look for those loamy areas, and you'll have a better chance of finding them on the dry years. On a typical year, you want well-drained, loamy soils, but like I said, I've found them in clays, I've found them in sand. You can find them pretty much anywhere if you have enough moisture. And even then, morels, they don't always follow these rules. They can just literally just pop out of anywhere. So when morel season's starting out, focus on the south-facing slopes first. Those are the ones that are going to get the most sunlight coming off the winter. That sun's still kind of in the south, and it's going to have the most sunlight. It's going to catch the most sunlight. It's going to warm those soil temps up quicker than slopes facing other directions. So focus on the south-facing slopes first, and then as the season progresses and the soil temps get warmer, you're not going to find them on the south just because it's going to get too warm for the morels. You're going to want to focus on the north-facing slopes, and that's later, like mid-May, late May, depending where you're at. They're going to start growing on that side, and they're also going to move up. So first thing in the season, they're going to be on the lowlands. They're going to be the river bottoms, the creek bottoms, and then as it warms up and the soil temps warm up, and maybe you get enough moisture, then they're going to kind of just keep growing up the hills, and that's where you need to go. So, and it's kind of just, it's that natural progression, and then once it gets too warm, they're not there. They're not there until next year. So as I said, these are kind of just general tips on where to look for morels. River bottoms, creek bottoms, those are favorite places because they usually have a lot of silt, or they have a lot of nutrients in the soil, and that's why another great place to look is forest, timber, whatnot, is because that leaf matter stays there and it rots, and it just forms really good organic matter in the soil that the morels love, and they're tapped into the trees as well. And the final tip for where to look is the same spot you found them the year before. Not always, but a good rule of thumb is if you find morels in one area, obviously, there's the right conditions there. There was the right conditions there at one point that they allowed the morels to grow, so there should be some there again. Now, it might vary from year to year. You might only find 4 one year, you might find 100 the next year, and you might only find 5 the next year. I've definitely had that happen in spots I've gone. But just keep going back to the areas that you've hunted before, because more often than not, the areas that you found them previously, there will be a few there at least, and then at least they're up in your area, and you can kind of use that information to go find other areas to look for. Alright, so now we're almost done. We talked about what a morel is, where to find them, when to find them. Now we're going to talk about harvesting them, and there's not a ton of stuff here, but it does bear mention, especially for the beginner mushroom hunter. So let's just get right to it. Starting off, where do you put your harvested mushrooms in? Now this can be a point of contention among shroomers. A lot of them prefer you use mesh bags or onion bags. Either one of those are good options in their eyes. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate on this in the next tip as well, but ultimately it doesn't matter that much. Now the thought process behind using the mesh bags and the onion bags are you're putting the morels in, and they're going to drop spores, and you're going to help propagate more morels in the future. The truth of the matter is, by the time you pick those morels, most of the spores have already gone, and the spores will travel miles just on the breeze, so you really don't need to, but the thought is every little bit helps, so it's good practice. I've used a mesh bag. I have a mesh bag just for morel hunting. I've also gotten out to the place where I'm going morel hunting and forgot my mesh bag, so I've used my hat, I've used a bucket, I've used even a plastic grocery bag, and whatever works in a pinch. But you can go down to the store and get a mesh laundry bag for only a couple bucks, and they do work fairly nice, and it'll help vent your mushrooms out as well. Next one, and this is once again another point of contention, as I just mentioned, is how to harvest your morels. Do you cut them? Do you pull them? Do you pinch them? How do you harvest your morels? And a lot of this comes from the old wives' tale the old notion that morels are just like plants, that you cut a plant off and its growing point's still there, so it's going to grow back. It's got the roots, you got part of its stem there. That's not how morels work. If you cut that off, it's not growing back. All it is going to do is just rot. So it doesn't matter if you pull it, it doesn't matter if you cut it, it doesn't matter if you pinch it. In fact, there was actually a study, and they cut and pulled the morels and actually found that over, I think it was like 30 years, the plot where they pulled the morels actually yielded more than the plot where they cut, but it was only slightly. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The main benefit to cutting is you're not getting the dirt in when you, like if you just pulled them and threw them in your bag, you're going to get that dirt in your bag and it's going to get into the insides of the morels, and you don't want that. It's more work to clean them out then. So the main benefit to cutting is it's a little cleaner, but you can pull them and cut them out too. It doesn't ultimately matter why this is a huge point of contention. Once again, it goes back to that old wise tale. So do whatever you're comfortable with. If you do cut, you can just use a knife. It's pretty simple. You can pinch, like I said, kind of just pinch and twist, pull them up, or you can even use scissors. Some people really like the scissors method, especially for the littler ones like the grays. Once again, it's all up to you. And then finally, you've got your morels, you've got them harvested. What do you do then? Well, you're going to need to cut the ends off anyway. So if you did pull them, you're going to have to cut the ends off. So just another mark for cutting. But cut them in half and then soak them in water. I like to put salt in my water as well, and this will help draw the bugs out. If you want to dehydrate them, you can do that. You can throw them on a dehydrator. What I like to do when I dehydrate my morels is I don't even soak them in water. All I do is cut them in half and throw them on newspaper, and then have a fan run on them for a couple weeks, and then flip them over and do the same thing. Eventually they'll shrink down. Now you're going to have bugs in them, but put them in a dry bag, put them in a dry jar before you go to cook them. Put them in that salt water treatment for a few days. They'll swell right back up. Salt water will kill the bugs, and then you can enjoy them however you see fit. But that is all I have, guys. I also have morel cooking videos, so if you want to know how to cook morels, I prefer mine sauteed with a side of deer steak. It's really good. You can check that out. I'll actually put a link to that right up here so you can figure out how to do that if you want to eat them that way. There's a bunch of other great morel recipes out there as well. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully this helps you get on some morels. And if I forgot anything, guys, experienced shroomers, drop it down below. Let's help the newbies out. Let's help them find some morels to go with their other spring goodies, their asparagus, turkey, crappie, whatever they might be finding this spring. But that is all I have for you guys. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you out there. See ya.